Going beyond the headlines. Asking the questions you want answered. Exploring government policies and how they impact you. We are delving deeper.
Good evening and welcome to Delving Deeper. I'm your host, Sonolala. Joining us this evening are the Chief Executive Officer of the Office of the Disaster Preparedness and Management, better known as the ODPM, retired Major General Rodney Smart, Mrs. Curmira Gulston, the Hazard Mitigation Specialist, and Mr. Navindra Persad. He is the Regional Coordinator at the ODPM. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Delving Deeper.
Good evening, and thank you very much for having us.
So, CEO, I'll start with you in terms of today is the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. The theme this year is empowering the next generation for a resilient future. Tell us about what is the significance of this day.
Well, I'll start by mentioning that the day was declared by the United Nations General Assembly, and this was in 1989. And they felt it was necessary, given what was happening in the world with regard to disasters. They felt it was very necessary to keep focus on reducing risk, to make people more aware, and to understand what the world was experiencing, to have this day, a day of significance. So the day has been, for the past 35 years, we've commemorated this day. And as you indicated, the theme this year is about the youth and about empowering youth and making youth realize that they have a part to play. In fact, today I'm joined by two of my young colleagues from the ODPM, and it's to speak about the work that they are doing, the wonderful work they are doing to make Trinidad and Tobago safer and more resilient. So we are doing exactly what the General Council, the General Assembly thought, and that is about bringing youth into disaster risk reduction and keeping people aware of what is happening. You know, we are in the hurricane season now, and it's important that everyone in Trinidad and Tobago keep prepared, keep ready.
So today is International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, and this allows us the opportunity to recognize that we should not be focusing on just the hazards that impact us now, but also prepare persons and the society for hazards to come. And it offers us the opportunity to engage young persons in a meaningful way so that they are empowered to make a difference.
How exactly does the ODPM commemorate this day in Trinidad and Tobago?
So what the ODPM did last week, leading up to today, is to have a number of activities with our partners. We would have partnered with schools so that we spread education among school children. We would have done work with the University of the West Indies. We also would have brought into the fray the business community. So we would have worked with the business community. We would have also worked, interestingly, with the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment 1st Engineer Battalion. And they, it so happened, celebrated their 26th anniversary on Friday. And we partner with them to have an event at the Arima Velodrome. So a number of activities that we would have participated in and got people involved in. And, you know, we want to say thanks to our partners for commemorating this moment with us. And again, I want to mention the Ministry of Education and that youth development. That was wonderful.
A lot of the times you say, you know, it leaves a lot to be desired in terms of people actually being prepared for a situation, especially us Trinis. We always like to go last minute and so on. How much of a significant day and how important is this day for the general public, especially in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean by extension?
And today, you know, being here is significant from our perspective of making sure that we share this message. When we said that we would have partnered with persons, the whole idea was to make sure the general public became part of the process. And we use both traditional and social media, and we make sure and get the word out. So in addition to the activities, it is about that constant education and making people aware. Because what we are attempting to do at the ODPM is change the culture in Trinidad and Tobago to make people more disaster prepared, make them more disaster resilient, so that the challenges that we see outside of Trinidad and Tobago, we would not experience it here. And we would be in a better position. We would save lives. And one of the big challenges that we see outside the world is the amount of damage and destruction. We are hoping through the education of the ODPM that we will have a more resilient society.
And as we talk about damage and destruction, Mr. Persad, I want to bring you in the conversation. Earlier this year, we would have seen, at the start of the hurricane season, we would have seen Hurricane Beryl coming through Trinidad and Tobago, chilling through Trinidad and Tobago. We were spared the majority of it, but St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada, and some of the neighboring islands would not have been so lucky. I know TNTech would have actually sent crews in Carriacou to do some assistance. I know the ODPM would have also been involved in relief efforts and so on. Tell us about the ODPM on the ground lending the assistance, and share with us the experience from the ODPM side.
And I'd like to start off by saying that my deployment to Grenada was my first time in the post-impact environment following a Category 5 hurricane. And it was a very unique experience to me, given that it was my first time experiencing that level of destruction and damage. Carriacou and Petit Martinique, which are both dependencies of Grenada, which was the main focus of disaster response operations. Although the northern part of Grenada did sustain some damage, the majority of the damage and loss was sustained on the islands of Petit Martinique and Carriacou. I could say from the start, it was actually heart-wrenching to see the population there in terms of they losing their homes, roofs were damaged. There was severe disruptions to community lifelines. So the normal services that are available during times of normalcy were no longer available. So water supply, electricity, telecommunications, all were absent on the island. Persons had to seek refuge in shelters, and those homes that were able to not sustain much damage were operating as what they called pop-up shelters. So we saw that community engagement and involvement where neighbors were actually allowing residents who lost their homes to shelter in their homes. So it actually shows the strength of communities and how important it is to actually build a strong community base when it comes to disaster risk reduction. Another thing that stood out, and given the significance of youth in disaster risk reduction for this year's International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, a very strong involvement of the youth in the areas of the relief operation. And I speak of the operation that was ongoing on the island of Grenada and on the both islands of Petit Martinique and Carriacou. What stood out was that involvement of the youth. They were very much engaged and they were a positive influence to the operation. They were mainly volunteers and they were very eager to help, and they were actually going all out to provide support in any area that they could support in during the operation.
We talk about disaster relief and so on in terms of the ODPM coordinating those efforts. What else did the ODPM do in terms of on the islands of Carriacou, Petit Martinique, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada?
All right, so my deployment to Grenada would have been through what is known as the Regional Response Mechanism, and this is managed by the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. They have a regional coordinating center, which is located in Barbados. That center is responsible for coordinating efforts through the Regional Response Mechanism for hazard impacts that, similar to what occurred in Grenada some time ago, right? So when an island state or participating state is overwhelmed by a hazard impact, they begin coordinating resources from other islands, other participating states, based on the needs of the island or the state that has been impacted. So the ODPM would have provided support in the EOC, or what is known as the Emergency Operations Centers. So in the first instance of my deployment, I was stationed at the National Emergency Operations Center. And within 2 days of giving support there, I was then redeployed to Carriacou, where I spent approximately 2 weeks in my first deployment. And later on, I was deployed to Petit Martinique for 2 weeks. So the main support was provided to the Emergency Operations Center, and providing that operational support, generating situation reports, supporting with the logistics operation as well, ensuring that the areas that required strengthening were reflected in situation reports, and this was reported to the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency's coordinating unit, so that they in turn could coordinate additional resources to come into the island.
I'll add to that, Sunil. Trinidad and Tobago has a special responsibility for what is known as the southern subregion of the CARICOM area. And as part of the process, once we had recognized what had happened within our subsector, and Trinidad and Tobago is responsible for that southern subsector, inclusive of Grenada, Guyana, and Suriname. And what we would have immediately done was made contact with the Minister of National Security, made him aware of what had happened, and immediately he would have given approval for the ODPM to deploy persons there to assist, given our responsibility, but also members of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force would have deployed as well. And as you indicated, the Ministry of Public Utilities would have sent TNTEC and WASA. So Trinidad and Tobago has this special responsibility in the southern sub-region. So his deployment was not just by chance.
Just to add, Trinidad and Tobago, through the ODPM, has a National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Multi-Sectoral Committee. And by extension, we also have a civil society subsector. And it's important to bring the different national actors together so that we can support national efforts and also regional efforts. So this is one mechanism by which we supported Grenada and St. Vincent. What we did, we partnered with non-governmental agencies and civil society organizations to be able to mobilize resources to be able to support the ongoing efforts within the relief coordination through the SEDEMA system. So we were able to mobilize a lot of material and coordinate effectively that function in terms of relief and response to Grenada and St. Vincent.
Mr. Persad, we just have about 7 weeks or so before the hurricane season officially ends on November 30th. We spoke about it, TNT being fortunate thus far in terms of not being severely hit by any storm or anything like that. But are there lessons for us to learn? And you would have been on the ground in Carriacou, Petit Martinique, and some of these islands. Is it as devastating as we saw from some of the images? And do you think Trinidad and Tobago, as Trinidad and Tobago citizens, we take these possible storms, these warnings seriously?
I would like to state that the devastation that was seen in the pictures and on video footage, actually being in the post-impact environment, it's actually much more devastating to actually witness that in person. It really affects your mindset, and mentally it takes a toll as well, because actually being deployed to an area with no utilities, destruction all around, and also persons without homes, persons in shelters, it actually is a bit depressing. But the main focus was to ensure that the EOC was provided with the necessary support. And of course, some of the main lessons that stood out that I could take away from my experience, and of course it actually is reflected with the work that the ODPM is doing here in Trinidad as well, is actually to have strong relationship with the public sector, with the private sector, sorry. So having a very strong public-private partnerships, also having strong partnerships with civil society and non-governmental organizations. During my deployment, I saw how important it was to have these organizations support in humanitarian efforts. Their effort was well noted and was very well recognized. We saw the regional and international agencies, NGOs, non-governmental organizations coming into the islands, both Petit Martinique and Carriacou, to actually lend support, to provide capabilities that did not exist on the island. One example, and it's something that the ODPM worked on some time ago, and I saw the importance of it during my deployment, was actually disaster debris management. And that is very critical, ensuring that the roadways are cleared and everything is cleared, all the debris is cleared, so that the recovery operation could then take effect. So essentially, the ODPM some time ago would have worked on the National Disaster Debris Management Plan. And I actually saw how important that plan is when I was deployed to Carriacou and Petit Martinique, actually looking at areas that to use as temporary storage sites. Because of the size of Petit Martinique being a small island, they had to ship the debris out of the island to Grenada. So it's a logistic operation that is also involved with disaster debris management. And that was something that stood out to me, and a lesson that I could take away from that. Another key point is actually the importance of emergency operation centers. And similar to the structure, the disaster management structure that we have here in Trinidad, the National Emergency Operations Center, having that strong communication or strong lines of communication with local emergency operations centers is critical as well for severe hazard impact, similar to what occurred in Grenada with Hurricane Beryl.
Ms. Curmira, Ms. Gulston, you are the hazard mitigation specialist. In terms of storms, hurricanes, and these kind of things, can we prepare or mitigate against such effects?
Definitely. There are several measures that Trinidad and Tobago can issue. And what we try to employ at the ODPM is a tiered approach in terms of understanding what can you do as an individual, what can you do as a household, what can you do as a community, but what can you do as a wider state. So in terms of building these mitigated approaches, it takes an all of society approach, but it also enables persons to understand their risk. And when we say risk, it means it's a multidimensional concept. It is the tiers between exposure, hazard exposure, vulnerability, and coping capacity. And sometimes it is not always matched up in terms of equal components allocated to each. But in terms of the overall risk, it's important for persons to understand that even though you're exposed and vulnerable, you still can have the tools to have the capacity to be able to reduce some of your damage and losses. And that's what we try to employ to persons on the ground, understanding simple ways as an individual, as a household, what can you do? So clearing your drains, ensuring that you trim your trees, making sure that you have emergency plans for your family. These are some of the simple mechanisms by which you can mitigate some of the damage and losses faced by different hazards.
So, Mr. Persad, we talked about Trinbagonians not being adequately prepared for an oncoming hurricane or a storm and so on. What can we do to change the mindset and ensure that they're not rushing to the grocery and so on in the event, let's say we have an earthquake or even a storm or something of the sort?
Well, I could definitely say that I believe public education and having a very strong public education drive would in fact assist with helping to change the mindset of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. I myself being deployed to the devastated impact of Hurricane Beryl in Grenada would definitely has a changed mindset. So I would know. But to actually get that image to the local population here would need a very strong education drive. Having all different agencies and all different aspects of society as well educated on the various hazards that we are exposed to and the various preparation that is required for these hazards, right? So the ODPM, the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government Disaster Management units, we collaborate often to educate the public, different outreaches to help to promote disaster readiness within the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago.
And in addition to that, if I could add, we are also engaged with the Tobago Emergency Management Agency. So the agencies all work together. All the agencies that are focused on disaster risk reduction and disaster management as well, we work together. And it is that continuous messaging. You would have noticed over the past months, during prime time on all the television stations, the ODPM has been sharing information. And we choose prime time because naturally that's the time that persons are most engaged in the television. But we also do it continuously on social media and through the school. So we take the whole spectrum from the young persons, the children in school, all the way up to the aged persons. And we feel that through that messaging, and the three main organizations for disaster risk reduction in Trinidad and Tobago, continuously informing the public, we feel that change. But at the end of the day, I want to underscore, the responsibility is on people, on Trinbagonians, to take on that result. Let's not wait until something happens. Let's not learn the lesson after the fact. We know what we need to do. We've been hearing it all the time. Let us bring about that change so that we don't lose lives and that we are able to quickly recover from anything that challenges us.
We talk about disaster risk reduction, and if we do get a disaster, communication is key. I know just about 2 years ago, Major General Smart, I would have interviewed you at the launch of the public alert notification system. Is that still around? Is that still ongoing?
Oh yes. It's on and it's growing. And the ODPM has been using it. And at the time when you interviewed me, I made the point that it is for severe situations. And that's what we have been using it for. So anytime there's a severe situation, you can be sure that the public alert notification system, and let me use the acronym PANS so that everyone remembers it, right? And to sign up for it. We have had within the last few months an increase of persons showing interest and signing up for it. And it is one of our main platforms in terms of early warning systems. But if you allow me, I'll just add to that. We also have worked with the United Nations Development Program, with the Water Resource Agency, with the Ministry of Rural Development, with the Red Cross. And we've developed what we call the CFU system, Community Flood Early Warning System. So along with the PANS, we also have this. So the PANS is at the national level, and we have these warning systems within communities. In the next few months, we're going to be launching phase 2 of that Community Flood Early Warning System. And again, another mechanism to safeguard our society.
In terms of PANS, I know you said you would have gotten an increase in subscribers, but have you actually sent out alerts, and how effective has it been so far?
The last alert we would have sent out, if I recall, would have been when the same beryl was approaching. And it was amazing to see the gratitude expressed by our citizens, having gotten that message. And in addition to getting the message, they were able to share the message. And the ODPM has gone to another level. And what we've done is at the start of the program, we were sending out SMS messages because that's what the platform allowed us. But we've been working behind the scenes with the provider, Everbridge Solutions. And what we've now been able to do is move it from SMS alone to include now WhatsApp. So you'll get a WhatsApp message. And if you don't get that WhatsApp message, if you don't answer the message, it will go to SMS, email, phone ring. It will try to find you to make sure that you get the message that some danger is coming your way. And not just nationally, we've also been able to take it down to the community level. So when you signed up, you had indicated that you want community messages, the system will find you. So that was one of the occasions when we last used it. There was also a situation we had on the road going to Maracas, when you may recall there was a landslide. And again, it was during school holidays, and to avoid families going to the beach, we were able to send out a public alert notification message. And a final one I'll give you was a day there was a truck, gas delivery truck that was leaking fuel on Ryson Road. And to avoid persons using the roadway and seeking alternative ways, we would have sent out a message to the national community so that people were aware. And again, a number of praises we would have received for sending out that. So we use the platform, as I indicated, for severe emergencies and to make sure that persons are not discomforted in any way. I just want to make sure I make the point for major issues.
Just to add to what CEO mentioned regarding PANS, safe use, the different initiatives, it's all tied to the wider multi-hazard early warning systems initiative. 2022, the UN Secretary General would have launched early warning systems for all initiative. This incorporates different elements of the UN system, but also different national societies building early warning systems, and that strengthen of multi-hazard early warning systems into their wider national frameworks. So when we say multi-hazard early warning systems, it starts off through different pillared approaches. It starts with pillar 1, which speaks to risk knowledge, individuals understanding the different hazards that they're exposed to, how they can mitigate some of the risks that they're exposed to, but also it ties into pillar 2. Once you understand this national risk or this community risk, you're able to better equip yourselves or have the necessary tools or equipment in strategic locations, understanding where to put these equipment, but also understanding how many does the specific region need. Pillar 3 speaks to communication, using the equipment not just to provide the necessary data to the persons who operate in it, but make sure it reaches the end mile, make sure it reaches the persons that are most vulnerable, so that they are able to take the necessary anticipatory actions to reduce their damages and losses. And the final pillar, which is pillar 4, speaks to response capabilities. And that's where we drive some of the messaging in terms of disaster risk reduction with our stakeholders, making sure that they have the necessary tools and they have the enhanced capacity to be able to better respond in any incident. So this is where this multi-hazard early warning systems approach ties into the wider disaster risk reduction conversation. And this is one of the mechanisms by which the ODPM uses to drive some of our efforts nationally to build resilience.
Major General Smart, we talk about technology and about PANS and so on, but a couple of years ago we had the incident where we had the nationwide blackout, and I remember the same day it happened, I was on the way to La VG Lookout because they were actually launching it, and coming back now I had no cell service in terms to use Waze and so on to find myself out of there. I remember myself and the cameraman was coming out, and we missed the road, and we ended up coming back out on the North Coast Road and was wondering if to go left or right to Port of Spain. But when these type of things happen in terms of these disasters and so on, where cell service also goes, because we saw it in some of those islands in Carriacou, where electricity went and no cell service as well, no communication could have flowed in. What does the ODPM have in place to get the message out there to persons?
And I will start by saying, in addition to what the ODPM has, it is what our national networks have, because it is they who have to make sure that the cell sites come back up. And we have, I know for sure, through our partnership, we have with the TSTT, they have a system where they can move equipment around, mobile equipment, they call it COWS, I can't recall the acronym, but they call it COWS, cell systems on wheels, and they are able to move a system in place and provide for a community, right, information that they could use and get online. But specific to the ODPM is in the reign of emergency communications. So when something happens, what the ODPM already has done is make sure that consistently with the key national response agencies, we are in communication. So we don't need cellular service to remain in contact. And even as we go into the future, what are we hoping to do? We right now have limited satellite communications. We are hoping to invest in a system that allow more of our partners to have satellite communication. So while some of the key agencies, and I'll mention as well, the key national leaders, the ODPM has issued satellite phones to them, we want to move where more of our partners have satellite phones. So we are on the road to full communication, even in a disaster. Right now, we're doing well, but we want to do even better. And through those partnerships, Trinidad and Tobago will have its communication.
Do you want to explain to the public exactly what is satellite phones for those who may not know and how critical it is for in times of a disaster?
A satellite phone is a specialized instrument that allows communication, but through satellites. The technology has advanced to the point where even from a cell phone, once you have the correct software, you're able to communicate through satellite technology. That is something that we fortunately have been able to invest in ODPM, and we have been able to ensure that our national leaders have satellite phones. We also have satellite phones with the main response agencies. So that provides another level of communication in the event that our cell towers go down.
Is this also critical for Caribbean countries to have satellite phones to be able to communicate in the event of a disaster?
Yes, and in addition to the satellite phones in the throughout the Caribbean, we have minor satellites in all of the disaster management agencies. They are satellites, and we are able to communicate with each other so that even when the networks go down, communication takes place. That is one of the strong features of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management System, and one that we're very proud of. The ODPM, in fact, wants to invest in more of that technology so that more agencies in Trinidad and Tobago, especially the critical ones, are able to communicate even when our cell sites go down. Hopefully that won't happen.
In terms of fake news, Major General Smart, have you had any difficulty with that in terms of a response? Were you seeing fake news and you've had to possibly correct this in the public domain?
Unfortunately, yes. We are consistently in our messaging saying to the public, please only pay attention to official sources of information, because unfortunately, some of our citizens use this opportunity when things happen to decide that they're going to unsettle the population. It is so unfortunate, but for some people, that is fun. And we always have to be putting out what is fact versus what is fiction. So the answer is yes. And what I also enjoy seeing is the other agencies that are taking up the ODPM example and making sure and underscoring in their messages, please only listen to official sources of information.
And Mr. Persad, as we were talking about the satellite phones, I know, I believe it was in Carriacou, it was used there to communicate. Have you had any experience with this?
Oh yes, certainly. I could give one example of the usefulness of satellite phones in the emergency response. There was one instance where a guy who was an engineer by trade joined in the response effort, and we were actually in the process of setting up a field hospital, and he had to make contact with the manufacturer of the field hospital just to clarify some points on the manual. and he wasn't getting through with his normal WhatsApp call or email. And I was able to lend the satellite phone that I had in my possession, and he was able to make contact with the manufacturer in the United States. And they provided the necessary clarification for him to actually complete the objective of setting up the field hospital with the support of other personnel as well.
And that is a satellite phone that he would have gone to Grenada with from the ODPM. So it is using our technology not just internally, but also externally to help our neighbors as well.
Mr. Persad, what role does the ODPM play in terms of the disaster response?
The ODPM sits at the strategic national level of the country's disaster management structure. I mentioned the National Emergency Operations Center during my deployment in Grenada. Similar, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have a structure with a National Emergency Operations Center, and then there are satellite emergency operations centers, or what are sometimes known as local emergency operations centers. In Trinidad, they are sometimes termed municipal emergency operations centers, and these are within the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. Within each municipality, there's a disaster management unit that has a responsibility for disaster response and other aspects of disaster management as well. In times of severe hazard impacts or other types of emergencies, the National Emergency Operations Center at the ODPM becomes activated. And this follows the National Response Plan, which is a three-tiered system. And at level 1, we have, I will just give an example, an isolated incident that can be managed by the local resources of the municipality in which the incident is occurring. The disaster management unit or the competent agency would take lead following the incident command system. And should this incident escalate, let's say there's a major flood impact and it escalates to several communities becoming inundated, then the response may be upgraded to level 2. And now at level 1, the ODPM continuously monitors the situation and provides support once the request comes to the National Emergency Operation, comes to the ODPM. And when it's escalated to level 2, we see the National Emergency Operations Center coming into effect and actually providing strategic direction to the disaster response operation. At level 3, it's a situation where the resources of the country are overwhelmed to support response and recovery operations. And that is where, and as I mentioned earlier, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, through their regional coordinating center, liaising with the ODPM as the focal point for disaster risk reduction and management, and getting that support from outside, that international and regional support in the areas based on the needs that are provided to the coordinating unit.
Major General Smart, what can we expect from the ODPM in the coming months?
Quite a lot. The ODPM has been very busy in terms of strengthening Trinidad and Tobago's readiness and resilience, and we will continue to do that. A project that we're very excited about at the national level is what we call a comprehensive national disaster and climate risk assessment. First time ever being done in Trinidad and Tobago. And I would say very few countries in our region has been able to do that. And what that is looking at, we already know the challenges we have with disasters. Heavy rainfall causes flooding, landslides, heavy winds, etc. But also now looking at what is climate change, how it is impacting on the risk that we already have. So these hazards are prevalent. And now on top of the hazards that we already have, we now have climate risk impacting our society. So this assessment is going to take this very comprehensive look, and we've identified 10 sectors, we've identified 10 communities, and we're looking at 9 hazards. So no first time ever in Trinidad and Tobago something like this is going to be done, and it will pinpoint for us where we need to focus our few dollars to build national resilience. Of course, over time, we will be able to spread it throughout the whole island. But for now, we're beginning with this pilot project. And I want to say thanks to the Ministry of Public, the Minister of National Security, the Minister of Planning and Development, because it is through both of them we are going to get a grant from the Caribbean Development Bank at the tune of about $5 million to do this study. And this is a very pivotal one. So that's at the national level. At the sectoral level, we've been working with a number of our critical agencies to ensure that in the event that we have a situation that causes a disaster, they are resilient. So we have this project called the Critical Resilience Project. And through the work that we've done already, we've done this study, and now we'll be working with them to make sure that they are strengthened. So that's our sectoral level. At the community level, we'll be doing quite a lot of work already with communities, all right, strengthening them, helping them identify risk, both in Trinidad and in Tobago. So it is maintaining that. And our messaging at the individual level, we're going to continue bombarding our people with messages that asking them to pay attention to preparing themselves, to securing their home, for strengthening their family, for example, their plans. You hear often we advertise the grab and go bags, to get registered on the public alert notification system, to volunteer and be part of the community flood early warning system mechanism in community. So we will continue driving the messages so that for us, while today is International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, we are moved to continue driving that message. And I want to say thank you for allowing us this opportunity to use another mechanism for us to speak to our national community and say that while we have been fortunate, while we have been spared, please let us get prepared, because we've seen what has happened throughout the world. In fact, this week, we would have seen Hurricane Milton and what it would have done to Florida. And a few weeks ago, there was Hurricane Helene. And then we had buried the earliest hurricane in the Caribbean region in ages. And we have, as a country, to realize that we can get ahead of the curve and prepare ourselves. Know your risk, reduce your risk, develop a plan, and help others to implement the plan.
All right, just before we wrap up, Mr. Persad, just your final thoughts.
I would just like to say that to continue the efforts of the ODPM, we require what was mentioned before, a whole of society approach. And just to emphasize how important this is, having all aspects of society involved in disaster risk reduction and management as well. And as my colleague mentioned, the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Multi-Sectoral Committee, this was actually formed to help drive and streamline disaster risk reduction and management across all sectors in Trinidad and Tobago.
Ms. Gulston?
Today is International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction, and it allows us the opportunity to educate, empower, but also engage with persons, especially young persons. And this is the theme that we are trying to drive at the national level. The Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management continues to implement disaster risk reduction efforts at the national level, but also continues to empower young persons to be able to equip them with the knowledge, the skills, and the leadership to be able to build resilient societies. So we are here educating persons, empowering persons, and we look forward to further engagement with the wider public.
I would like to emphasize to Trinidad and Tobago that as we are facing this threat from climate change, that we must become more mindful of what we need to do as a society. We are very fortunate. We've lost very few lives when we look at disaster effects on our society. While we've had some damage to property, fortunately for us, we've lost few lives. And I would want to ask the national community to use this opportunity so that our society can remain protected, to continue to educate themselves, because it is only through the education that we would learn and know what to do. And as a final thought to the youth, get involved. We are here today to inform and to drive home the point that unless you are part of the actions, unless you become fully involved, in the future, our society is going to be challenged. The youth is our future, and we make this special appeal to you to be part of the process to make our society a stronger, a more resilient, and a more prosperous one. Sunil, thank you very much for having us.
Well, we have been speaking to officials from the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, the ODPM. It's been a very serious discussion, but a very important one, and we hope that more Trinis, more Trinbagonians would be better prepared as we go deeper and deeper into that hurricane season. Thank you very much for joining us on this week's episode.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Join us at the same time next week for another episode of Delving Deeper. I am Sunolala. On behalf of the entire crew, have a great night.